The morning heat hung heavy over the city of Cedar Hill, a quiet southern town where charm often hid the cracks of deep-rooted problems. A man stepped out of a weathered pickup truck, the kind that had seen too many miles and too few repairs. His name was Marcus Hale. He looked like any other tired traveler. Worn jeans, a plain shirt, a faded baseball cap pulled low. But Marcus wasn't just any man walking into the Cedar Hill Police Department that morning. He was their newly appointed chief of police, and he had come to see the truth for himself, without the uniform, without the badge, without the respect that came with it. He wanted to know what his officers were like when they thought no one was watching. The parking lot buzzed with chatter and the crunch of boots against gravel. Two officers leaned against a patrol car laughing over something crude, their voices echoing across the lot. Another one tossed a coffee cup onto the pavement and didn't bother to pick it up. Marcus watched quietly, taking it all in. The way they carried themselves told him everything he needed to know about the culture inside. He took a slow breath. This was his first day as chief, but no one knew that yet. He crossed the lot toward the back entrance, his mind steady on his mission. He had worked in law enforcement for 20 years, serving in larger cities where corruption hid behind polished smiles. Cedar Hill was supposed to be a smaller, simpler place, but reports of misconduct, complaints from citizens, and whispers from within had painted a different picture. Marcus had accepted the position to change that, to rebuild trust, but first he had to see how deep the rot went. As he entered through the side door, a blast of cold air hit him. The hallway smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He moved slowly, observing every detail, the way officers joked too loudly, the sideways glances, the careless laughter. Then, a sharp voice sliced through the noise. "Hey! You lost, old man?" Marcus turned. A tall, broad-shouldered white officer stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a mocking grin tugging at his mouth. His name tag read Officer Clayton Ross. Behind him, 3 others hovered, smirking like a pack waiting for entertainment. Marcus kept his expression calm. "No, sir. Just looking for the captain's office." Ross chuckled, taking a step closer. "The captain doesn't have time for folks like you. Try the shelter downtown." A quiet laugh rippled through the small crowd. One of the younger officers muttered something Marcus couldn't catch, but the word hobo was clear enough. Marcus stood still. He had seen this type before, men who mistook their badge for permission. "I'm just asking for directions," Marcus said evenly. Ross's grin widened. "And I'm giving you one. Out that door, before someone calls security." The laughter grew louder. Marcus's hand stayed loose at his sides, but inside, his pulse was steady fire. He knew what was coming. He could see it in the man's eyes. Ross stepped closer until they were nearly chest to chest. Then, without warning, he spit straight into Marcus's face. The room went silent. Marcus blinked slowly, the spit warm against his skin. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped his face clean. "Is this how you treat everyone who comes through those doors?" he asked quietly. Ross smirked, shrugging. "Only the ones who don't belong." Behind him, someone snickered. Another officer shook his head, clearly amused. Marcus said nothing. He took one last look at Ross, memorizing the sneer, the arrogance, the smallness behind the swagger, and turned away. The laughter followed him down the hall, but it would not last long. As Marcus reached the main corridor, the intercom crackled to life. "All personnel, report to the briefing room immediately." Marcus's jaw tightened. It was time for introductions. He straightened his shirt, adjusted his cap, and walked calmly toward the sound of voices gathering beyond the double doors. He could already hear Ross laughing inside, bragging about how he'd put a vagrant in his place. Marcus allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. They were about to learn exactly who that vagrant was. The chatter inside the briefing room echoed like restless energy waiting for release. Officers filled the seats, some sipping coffee, others cracking jokes about the homeless guy who had wandered in earlier. Clayton Ross was in the corner, still grinning, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "Guy thought he could just stroll in here like he owned the place," Ross said. "Didn't even know where he was. Guess I had to teach him some manners." The laughter that followed was cruel and careless, the kind that came easy when no one felt accountable. Marcus pushed open the side door and stepped inside quietly. He held a plain brown folder tucked under his arm, the official seal of Cedar Hill Police printed in gold across the front. For a few moments, no one noticed him. Then Captain Darrell Monroe, a stout man with thinning hair and kind but tired eyes, called the room to order. "All right, everyone, listen up. Today's a big day. We're welcoming our new chief of police, so let's show some respect for once, yeah?" Ross laughed softly under his breath, thinking he was in on the joke. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that smug confidence still fixed in place. Monroe gestured toward the door. "Chief Hale, if you would, please join us." The room went still. Every eye turned toward Marcus. Ross's smirk vanished as recognition hit. The same man he'd humiliated just an hour ago was walking calmly toward the front, his head held high, his eyes sharp and unreadable. Marcus stopped at the podium. The silence was thick enough to choke on. He placed the folder down, glanced across the sea of faces, and began to speak. "Good morning," he said, his tone even, his presence commanding. "My name is Marcus Hale. As of today, I am your new chief of police." No one moved. Ross's face drained of color. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was replaced by a suffocating tension. "I came here early this morning," Marcus continued, "in plain clothes. I wanted to see the department as it really operates. Not the version cleaned up for meetings or press photos. The real one." A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. "What I saw," Marcus said, "was not what I'd hoped to find." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "What I saw was arrogance, disrespect, a culture that mistakes cruelty for strength." His eyes swept the room slowly before landing on Ross. "And I saw an officer spit in the face of a man he thought was beneath him." Ross's mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. Marcus took a measured step forward. "That man was me." The words hit like a thunderclap. A few officers turned to look at Ross in disbelief. Others stared down at the floor, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "I've worn a badge for 20 years, Marcus said quietly. "I know what it means to face danger, to make hard choices, to protect people who don't always thank you. But what I saw this morning wasn't about protection. It was about power. And power without respect is poison." He leaned slightly on the podium, his voice calm but cutting. "Let me make one thing very clear. That poison ends today." The silence stretched. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. "You may think what happened this morning was small," Marcus said. "A joke, a bit of fun. But moments like that destroy trust. They destroy this badge. They destroy everything we claim to stand for." Ross looked like he wanted to disappear. Sweat dotted his forehead. The man who had laughed with him earlier avoided his eyes. Marcus turned to Captain Monroe. "Effective immediately, Officer Clayton Ross is suspended pending an internal investigation. His behavior this morning is not only disgraceful, it's a reflection of everything that's gone unchecked here for too long." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus raised a hand and it stopped at once. "If any of you think this is just one man's punishment," he said, "you're wrong. This is about accountability, about rebuilding a department that's lost its way." He straightened, his tone softening slightly. "I didn't come here to fire people. I came here to build something worth protecting. But make no mistake, anyone who disrespects the badge or the people we serve will not wear it under my watch." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words pressed against every chest in the room. Then Marcus took a slow breath and said, "Now, let's talk about how we fix this." He began outlining new procedures, community engagement, bias training, open-door policies. But his words weren't just administrative. They were personal. Every sentence carried conviction. Every pause carried purpose. By the time he finished, the room wasn't laughing anymore. There was no mockery, no whispers. Only silence and something new starting to take shape. Respect. As the officers stood to leave, Marcus caught Ross's eye one last time. There was no anger in his face, only disappointment. Ross lowered his gaze and walked out first, shoulders heavy. Marcus stayed behind, his hands resting on the podium, his thoughts already turning to the work ahead. The hardest part of change wasn't punishing the wrong people, it was teaching the right ones to do better. The sound of the door closing behind the last officer echoed like a promise. He had seen the worst of his department that morning. Now he would build its best. The real work was only beginning. The days that followed felt like a storm that refused to pass. Whispers moved through the station faster than the morning coffee. Every hallway carried the same question in hushed tones. What would the new chief do next? Marcus walked those halls every day, unhurried and calm. He spoke to the janitor, the receptionist, and the rookie officers who usually went unnoticed. His presence unsettled some and inspired others. He listened more than he talked, taking notes in a small leather notebook he carried everywhere. One afternoon, a young officer named Nina Alvarez stopped him outside the records room. Her eyes were nervous, but her voice was steady. "Chief, can I speak with you?" "Of course," Marcus said. Nina hesitated. "What you said in the meeting, it hit me. I've been here 3 years, and I've seen things I shouldn't have ignored. Jokes, comments, the kind that make you want to disappear if you speak up. I didn't say anything because I didn't think it mattered." Marcus looked at her with quiet empathy. "It always matters, Officer Alvarez. Doing nothing is how this starts. Doing something is how it ends." She nodded, emotion in her eyes. "I want to do better, Chief, I really do. That's all I ask," Marcus replied. "Start by helping me understand how deep it goes." They spent the next hour in his office going over reports, old complaints, and names that kept appearing on incident logs. It wasn't just Ross. There were others, officers who'd been warned, written up, even accused, but somehow had always been cleared by internal reviews. Marcus saw the pattern immediately. Friendship and fear had buried accountability for years. That would change. By the end of the week, he issued a department-wide directive. All prior complaints would be reopened for review. Anonymous reporting channels were established, and a civilian oversight board was formed for transparency. The pushback came swiftly. Some officers muttered that Marcus was cleaning house. Others refused to speak to him at all. But he didn't waver. He knew resentment would surface before respect. One morning, as he entered the station, he noticed Ross sitting in the lobby in plain clothes waiting for his appeal hearing. The arrogance was gone. In its place sat a man who finally understood the weight of his actions. Their eyes met briefly, but neither spoke. The silence said enough. When Ross's appeal was reviewed later that day, the evidence was damning. Prior complaints, patterns of misconduct, witness statements. Marcus signed the papers himself. Termination effective immediately. The decision sent a ripple through the department. Some saw justice. Others saw betrayal. But for Marcus, it was neither. It was simply what had to be done. Late that evening, Captain Monroe stopped by Marcus's office. The light from the desk lamp threw long shadows across the room. "Rough week, Chief," Monroe said, setting down a report. "Change always feels rough at first," Marcus replied. "But it's necessary." Monroe nodded slowly. "You've stirred up a lot of talk. Some of them are scared. Some are angry. But a few are starting to think maybe you're right." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day settling in his shoulders. Fear fades. Respect lasts. That's what we're building here. The captain smiled faintly. "You know, I've been in this department 25 years. I've seen chiefs come and go. Most of them just talk. You're the first one to make them look in the mirror." Marcus's eyes softened. "That's the only way we get better." After Monroe left, Marcus stayed in the quiet of his office. Through the window, he could see the city lights flickering in the distance. Cedar Hill was small, but its people deserved better than what they'd been given. He thought about the faces he'd seen that day. The rookie who smiled nervously at him in the hallway. The community members who had begun to drop by just to talk. The older sergeant who'd finally apologized for looking the other way. Progress wasn't loud. It was slow, steady, and often invisible at first. But it was happening. The following week, Marcus visited a local community center where families gathered to share concerns about policing. An elderly woman stood up during the meeting. Her voice trembled, but her words carried strength. "My grandson stopped believing the police cared about us a long time ago," she said. "But when he heard what you did, he told me, maybe things can change." That's the first time I've heard hope in his voice in years. Marcus nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. "Hope is a start," he said gently, "and we'll build from there." The room filled with quiet applause. For the first time since his arrival, Marcus felt that maybe the city was beginning to trust again. But trust, he knew, was fragile. And as he left the community center that night, He couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone in his department wanted that trust restored. There were still those clinging to the old ways, waiting for him to fail, and before long they would make their move. The shift inside the department was visible, but beneath the quiet progress something darker was stirring. Old alliances whispered in corners, their laughter forced and uneasy. A few officers kept their distance whenever Marcus walked by, their silence sharper than words. One evening, Marcus was reviewing reports when a knock broke his concentration. Captain Monroe stepped in, his face tight with concern. "Chief, you should see this," he said, handing over a printed report. It was a copy of an anonymous complaint, accusing Marcus of unfair discipline and targeting officers without cause. Marcus read it slowly, his jaw tightening. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "No name attached." Monroe nodded. "They're afraid or pretending to be. But I've seen this before. Someone's trying to undermine you." Marcus leaned back in his chair thinking, that means they're scared the change is working. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the last streaks of daylight were fading over the city. "Keep an eye on morale, Daryl. If someone's stirring trouble, I want to know before it spreads." In the days that followed, rumors began to multiply. Some said Marcus had plans to fire half the force. Others claimed he'd been brought in to shut down the entire department. Each lie grew faster than the truth could catch it, but Marcus refused to answer gossip with anger. Instead, he doubled down on presence. Every morning he joined the patrol briefings. He rode along on calls. He worked the late shifts beside the younger officers, showing them what leadership looked like. It was during one of those patrols that he met Officer Jamal Price, a rookie who had joined the department just 6 months earlier. Jamal was quiet but sharp, the kind of man who noticed everything and spoke only when it mattered. As they drove through Cedar Hill's narrow streets, Jamal broke the silence. "Chief, I don't get why everyone's so against you. You're trying to make things better." Marcus smiled faintly. "Change makes people uncomfortable, son, especially when it threatens the habits they built careers around." Jamal nodded. "Still doesn't seem right. Folks around here finally feel like the police care again. That's what scares them," Marcus said. Later that night, when Marcus returned to the station, he found a folded note taped to his office door. It read, "Go back where you came from before we make you." No signature. Just those words written in black ink. He held the note for a long moment, then placed it in a drawer. He didn't call for an investigation, not yet. Whoever had written it wanted a reaction. They wouldn't get one. The next morning, the tension in the air was unmistakable. Some officers avoided eye contact. Others seemed defiant. Marcus began the day's briefing without acknowledging it. "We have a job to do," he said, his tone calm but firm. "The community depends on us not just for safety but for trust. We can't afford to lose either." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "You don't have to like me. You don't have to agree with me. But you will respect this badge. Because when that stops meaning something, we all lose." A few heads nodded quietly. Most stayed still. But Marcus caught the flicker of thought behind their eyes. Seeds of reflection had begun to take root. That afternoon, as he walked through the station, Nina Alvarez stopped him again. "Chief, some of us are meeting after shift," she said. "Talking about starting a peer group, something positive. Maybe a mentorship thing." "I think it could help," Marcus smiled. "That's exactly how real change begins. Small circles that grow bigger." The meeting happened that night in the break room. A handful of officers gathered, uncertain at first, but by the end, they were talking about accountability, training, fairness, and rebuilding trust, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. For the first time, Marcus saw the first real spark of unity. But he also knew every spark drew the eyes of those who preferred the dark. The next morning, he arrived early to find the lobby unusually quiet. As he turned the corner, he stopped cold. Spray painted across the wall in red letters were the words, "Traitor." Marcus stared at it without speaking. His expression didn't change, but inside, his resolve hardened like stone. He turned to Captain Monroe, who had just walked in behind him. "Get maintenance to cover it up," Marcus said. "We've got work to do." Monroe hesitated. "You're not going to investigate?" "Oh, I will," Marcus said softly. "But not with paint cans and rumors. We'll get to the truth the right way." That day he called a full department meeting. No introductions, no warnings, just truth. He stood before them, the same quiet strength in his voice that had carried him through everything else. "Someone thinks fear will stop progress," he began. "Someone thinks threats will bring back the old ways. But I've got news for whoever that is. Fear doesn't stop justice. It just delays it. And justice always catches up." The room was silent. Eyes shifted. No one moved. "This badge," Marcus said, holding his own up for them to see, "doesn't make any of us better than the people we serve. It makes us responsible for them. And if you can't handle that, you're in the wrong uniform." He let the silence hang before adding, "Change is coming whether you like it or not. You can fight it or you can be part of it. The choice is yours." Then he walked out, leaving the weight of his words behind. That night, as rain fell against the station windows, Marcus stayed in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He knew the hardest part wasn't over. It was only beginning. But for the first time since he'd arrived, he wasn't alone in the fight. Weeks turned into months, and the department that once reeked of arrogance and fear began to breathe differently. The laughter that once mocked others was replaced with conversation that mattered. But even as progress took root, tension simmered beneath the surface, waiting for one more moment to test everything Marcus had built. It came one evening in early winter. The air outside bit cold against the windows, and the city streets glowed under flickering lamps. Marcus was working late when the call came through. An officer-involved incident, shots fired in a residential neighborhood. He grabbed his coat and left without hesitation. When he arrived, blue lights flashed against the wet pavement. Officers huddled behind cars, shouting instructions into radios. A young man, barely out of his teens, was handcuffed on the curb, tears streaking down his face. His mother screamed from behind the police line, begging to see him. Marcus pushed through the chaos. "Who's the lead here?" he asked. Sergeant Owen, one of the older officers, resistant to change, turned toward him. "Chief, we've got this handled." Kid fit the description of a suspect who fled a robbery. Didn't stop when ordered. Marcus's voice was calm but sharp. "Did he have a weapon?" Owen hesitated. "No, sir." But he reached for his pocket. Marcus looked at the boy. His clothes were soaked from the rain, his voice cracking as he tried to speak. "I was grabbing my phone. I didn't do anything." The mother sobbed harder, calling out her son's name, Eli. Marcus crouched down beside the boy, his tone gentle. "Son, I'm Chief Hale. You're safe now, all right? We'll figure this out." He stood and faced Owen. "Take the cuffs off him." "Chief, protocol says—" "Take them off," Marcus repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Owen did as he was told, the hesitation obvious. The boy's wrists were raw and red, but Marcus saw something deeper in the young man's eyes, fear mixed with disbelief. Marcus turned to the crowd gathering behind the tape. "Everyone goes home safely tonight," he said firmly. "That's how this department works from now on." Later that night, back at the station, Marcus called an emergency briefing. The entire department showed up, still buzzing with speculation. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at them, his silence heavier than words. "When I came here," he began, "this department was broken. Not because you didn't know how to do your jobs, but because too many of you forgot why you took them in the first place. What happened tonight almost became another tragedy. It didn't, and that's progress, but not enough." He paced slowly, his tone growing stronger. "Our job isn't just to enforce the law. It's to protect life, all life. Every call, every decision, every second matters. We don't get to choose who deserves respect. We give it to everyone because that's what wearing this badge means." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. He continued, his words measured but filled with conviction. "Some of you came here for power. Some came here for pride. But I came here for purpose, and I need people who feel the same." He looked at the younger officers. "You're the future of this department. Don't inherit the mistakes of the past. Build something better." As he spoke, faces began to change. Heads lifted. Even the skeptics who had once dismissed him found themselves listening. The truth in his voice was undeniable. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out. They stayed, talking, thinking, reevaluating. And for the first time, Marcus felt the shift become real. In the weeks that followed, community meetings grew larger. Citizens who once shouted in anger now came to speak in hope. The department launched youth programs, neighborhood patrol partnerships, and volunteer outreach. Officer Nina Alvarez led new training sessions on communication and empathy. Jamal Price became a mentor to younger recruits. Captain Monroe oversaw a citizen review board that brought transparency to every disciplinary case. Cedar Hill began to heal, slowly but unmistakably. 1 year after that first day, Marcus stood in the same parking lot where it all began. The winter wind was sharp, carrying the smell of pine and fresh asphalt. He watched as officers greeted locals walking past, their exchanges filled with warmth instead of tension. He thought back to Ross, to the spray-painted wall, to every obstacle that had tried to break him. And he realized that true reform was never about punishment, it was about courage. The courage to look at what was wrong and still believe it could be made right. A young boy on a bike rolled past and stopped beside him. "Are you Chief Hale?" the boy asked shyly. "I am," Marcus said, smiling. "My mom says you made the police good again," the boy said. Marcus chuckled softly. "We're trying, son. Every day." The boy grinned, waved, and pedaled off down the street. Marcus looked around at the station. The same walls, but a different spirit inside them. Change wasn't loud. It wasn't quick. But it was alive. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and walked back toward his office. There was still work to do. There would always be work to do. But for the first time since stepping foot in Cedar Hill, he knew he wasn't walking alone.